For thousands of years, the most beautiful women in mythology have been worshipped as these, divine goddesses of love.
Right, the ultimate symbols of beauty.
Exactly. And I want you, the listener, to just picture the imagery we all know. Like immortal, ethereal nymphs draped in shimmering silks, just dancing through palatial halls made of gold and gems.
It's a very specific, very romanticized image.
It really is. And, in Hindu mythology, these figures are known as Apsaras. Across centuries of stories, they are the ultimate symbols of this carefree divine seduction.
Yeah, they're muses, they're dancers, basically the embodiments of untethered joy.
Right. But if you look at the fine print of their immortality, a completely different reality emerges. Like, what if they weren't goddesses at all?
That's the big question.
Yeah, what if, despite the glittering jewels and the eternal youth, they were essentially government property? Like exploited workers trapped in a sprawling, inescapable cosmic bureaucracy.
It's a premise that completely forces us to reevaluate the classical epics,
Uh-huh.
honestly. When we change the perspective from the kings and the sages to the women who were used as pawns in their political games, well, the heavenly paradise starts to look remarkably like a high-end, heavily surveilled prison.
And that shift in perspective is exactly what we're unpacking today. We have a fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive.
We really do. Some incredible literature and theory to get through.
At the center of it is Kavita Kané's novel, Menaka's Choice. But we aren't just, summarizing a mythological fiction book today.
No, definitely not.
We are analyzing Kané's retelling through a specific stack of academic and theoretical materials. We're looking at Margaret Walter's overviews of Simone de Beauvoir, Gayatri Spivak's foundational essays on the subaltern, Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, and Gaston Bolbec's writings on post-colonial feminist perspective.
That's a heavy analytical framework for sure.
It is. And just a quick note before we dive right in, because we're dealing with some heavy analytical frameworks today involving gender, power dynamics, and post-colonial theory. We'll be exploring these texts entirely through the specific socio-political and literary lenses provided by our authors.
Right, we're acting as guides through their arguments.
Exactly. We are impartially mapping out the arguments made in these source materials to see how they deconstruct the myth, not endorsing any particular political stance. Our mission here is to understand the mechanics of this critique.
Which is really the most rigorous way to approach this material, I think. The goal here is to understand the methodology of feminist reclamation.
Yeah, to see how the myth is taken apart and put back together.
Right. And we are looking at Menaka, who is arguably the most famous Apsara in all of mythology. She's known primarily for a single act, right? Seducing the incredibly powerful sage Vishwamitra and breaking his intense meditation.
That's her whole claim to fame in the classic texts.
Exactly. For centuries, her entire identity has been reduced to just being an obstacle, a beautiful trap.
Right, just a plot device for the man's story.
Yeah, but Kané's work operates by giving Menaka a voice and a critical interiority. And that forces us to look past the traditional patriarchal gaze and actually examine the deep structural inequalities of Indralok, which is Indra's heaven.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the foundation of that structural inequality, because to understand why Menaka eventually rebels, we have to look at how she was created in the first place.
The origin story is so crucial here.
It really is, because the origin story of the Apsaras sounds, on the surface, incredibly majestic. Can you walk us through the actual mechanics of their birth in the mythology?
Yeah, absolutely. So the birth of the Apsaras is tied to one of the most famous events in Hindu cosmic lore, the Samudra Manthan, or the churning of the Milky Ocean.
Oh, wow. That's a massive cosmic event.
It's huge. In the mythology, the Devas, the gods, and the Asuras, the demons, they actually work together to churn the cosmic ocean to obtain the nectar of immortality.
Right. They're basically churning the universe to get the ultimate prize.
Exactly. And out of this intense churning, various divine entities and treasures emerge from the azure vapors.
And the Apsaras are among them.
Yes. Kane describes the Apsara as emerging robed in an ethereal shimmer, basically designed to define desire from a million emotions. They're meant to bewitch everyone with their arousing beauty.
But Menaka has a slightly different or maybe more specific origin, right?
She does. Menaka specifically has a unique origin tied to this. Vishwamitra later tells her that her name, Menaka, literally means born from the mind, because she was essentially conceptualized and created directly from the mind of Lord Brahma, the creator god.
Oh, wait, I have to pause here. emerging from a sacred, churning cosmic ocean, being quite literally born from the mind of the creator of the universe. I mean, that sounds like the ultimate divine pedigree.
On paper, yeah, it sounds incredible.
Right. It sounds like they are born into a status of supreme reverence. Why wouldn't it be considered a divine blessing?
It's a crucial question, and it's actually where we need to introduce our first theoretical lens from the source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
This is where Margaret Walter's synthesis of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex is highly applicable. Beauvoir argued that under patriarchy, woman comes to stand for nature, for mystery, for the non-human.
So they represent concepts rather than being actual people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Crucially, she points out that what a woman represents becomes structurally far more important than what she actually is, or what she herself experiences.
Oh, that makes so much sense in this context.
Right. The creation of the Apsaras is the absolute, literal manifestation of this concept. They aren't born as individuals with their own destinies.
They're manufactured.
Yes, manufactured purely for aesthetic and sexual utility. Kané's text explicitly states they are the mystic and the romantic. They were created, quite literally, to bewitch and distract. Their existence is 100% relational and functional.
So you're saying their creation was essentially the inception of an exploitative commodification. They were literally designed as tools from day one.
That's exactly how the source texts frame it.
But I'm still struggling with the hierarchy here a little bit. If they live in heaven and they are immortal, aren't they considered goddesses? Don't they have the rights of a deity?
Not at all. And Kané uses the dialogue in the book to shatter that specific illusion. There is an incredibly rigid, almost caste-like hierarchy in Indralok.
Really? Even in heaven?
Especially in heaven. Later in the novel, when Menaka attempts to argue for her basic rights, Indra, the king of the gods, he just shuts her down with a very specific, brutal distinction. He tells her, "You are an Apsara, not a Devi."
And what exactly is the legal or social difference between an Apsara and a Devi in this context? Because to an outsider, it sounds like splitting celestial hairs.
It's a massive difference. A Devi is a true goddess. A Devi is a consort, a recognized deity who possesses rights, standing, and agency within the celestial hierarchy.
Like who?
Like Parvati, Lakshmi, Saraswati. These are devas. They have power. The Apsaras, on the other hand, are granted eternal youth and beauty, and they are immortal, but they are absolutely denied the respect, autonomy, and rights of deities.
So what are they, legally speaking?
They belong to the court. They are celestial property.
Wow. It's basically like being genetically engineered for a highly demanding job without anyone asking if you wanted it.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are born straight into an inescapable, eternal contract. Sure, you get the corner office immortality and perfect beauty, but you don't actually own anything. Not even your own bodily autonomy. You are literally just an asset on the company ledger.
That is precisely how Kane frames it. They are provided with incredible luxury, but their underlying status is one of indentured servitude.
Gilded cages, basically.
Exactly. They dwell in the life of the soul and inspire art and poetry, but their core, state-mandated function in Indra's court is to be lethal weapons of seduction.
Lethal weapons?
Yes. And they are deployed specifically against anyone who threatens the political stability of Indra's throne.
Which brings us to the logistics of how this celestial system actually operates, because they aren't just, wandering around heaven, painting and dancing whenever they feel like it.
No, not at all. It's highly regulated.
Right. The source material describes the royal court of Indralok, Sudhar Mahal, not as a peaceful divine paradise, but as a corporate patriarchy. How exactly does Indra use them? Like, what's his political vulnerability?
We have to look at Indra's specific political anxieties. Indra is the king of the devas, but he is fundamentally insecure.
Insecure about what? Other gods taking over.
Actually, his primary fear isn't necessarily other gods, it's mortals. Specifically, mortal kings with too much ambition, or rishis, which are mortal sages.
Okay, wait. Why would the king of heaven be afraid of mortal sages?
Because in this mythology, sages perform tapas. Tapas is an intense, austere form of meditation and physical self-denial.
Like fasting and meditating for years.
Exactly. When a sage performs tapas for years or centuries, they generate massive amounts of cosmic heat and spiritual power.
Oh, so it's like leveling up in a video game, but with cosmic energy?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. If a sage accumulates enough tapas, they can literally alter reality, create new universes, and directly threaten Indra's position as the ruler of heaven.
So tapas is essentially a currency of cosmic power. And if a mortal hoards enough of it, they can stage a hostile takeover of heaven. That is wild.
It is wild. And Indra's primary defense mechanism against these mortal sages isn't, a standing army of warriors.
It's the Apsaras.
It is the Apsara. Whenever a sage gets too close to achieving ultimate power, Indra deploys an Apsara to go down to earth, seduce the sage, and break his concentration.
Because if he gets distracted, all that power is gone.
Exactly. Once the sage yields to lust or emotion, all that accumulated tapas is shattered, and the threat to Indra is neutralized.
Honestly, this sounds less like divine intervention and more like targeted political sabotage, like honey trapping for the gods.
That's exactly what it is. State-sponsored honey trapping.
And reading Kané's text, it's clear this requires serious training. It isn't just about natural charm or looking pretty. The novel details a highly managed environment where they are essentially put through a black ops training program for seduction.
The institutionalized nature of it is deeply unsettling when you read it closely. They are instructed by Kama, the deva of lust, and Tumburu, who is a prominent celestial musician.
So they have literal professors of seduction.
Yes. They are systematically taught the 65-odd ways of making love. And Kama explicitly instructs them to submerge their personality when they dance or seduce.
Submerge their personality. That's so clinical.
It is. He teaches them that making love in this context isn't about mutual pleasure or sexual abandonment at all. It's a cold, crafted skill.
So it's pure performance.
Entirely. It is an artistry perfected to build sexual tension and intentionally manipulate male vulnerability. Their sexuality is completely weaponized for state gain.
The level of calculation described in the text is intense. Like, Kama tells the Apsaras that men are inherently fascinated and frightened by female sexual power, and he trains them exactly how to exploit that psychological tightrope.
He knows exactly what buttons to push.
Yeah, they are told to be sensual, sensuous, shameless, but to always maintain absolute internal control, like steering the target exactly where Indra needs him to go while making the guy think it's his own idea.
To really understand the systemic nature of this coercion, our sources point us to feminist literary theory, specifically Gayatri Spivak's concept of the subaltern.
Okay, let's unpack the subaltern theory, because that's a huge concept.
It is. Spivak's foundational essays usually examine the most economically impoverished, marginalized voices in a colonial setting.
Right, like the rural peasant woman who has zero voice in society.
Exactly. The person who cannot speak or be heard within the dominant colonial or patriarchal discourse. But when we apply Spivak's framework to Kane's Indralok, we uncover what we might call an elite subaltern.
See, I'm trying to wrap my head around that phrase. Elite subaltern sounds like an oxymoron. If they live in palaces, wear diamonds, and are universally desired, how are they marginalized?
This is where Spivak theory is so incredibly useful. Being a subaltern isn't just about a lack of material wealth. It's about a lack of institutional voice and access to the actual mechanisms of power.
So having nice things doesn't mean you have power.
Precisely. The Apsaras possess immense cultural capital in terms of physical beauty, and they live in absolute luxury. But they are entirely stripped of structural voice, political agency, and legal recourse.
They can't vote, they can't unionize, they can't say no.
Right. They are subjects who cannot speak for themselves within the hegemonic power structure of Indralok. Their actions, their bodies, and their futures are always dictated by Indra's agenda.
They are forced to commit what Menaka astutely calls covert motives, disguised as love.
Which is such a powerful phrase, covert motives.
It really is, and that distinction makes perfect sense. It explains why it would be so difficult for other characters in the mythology, or even human readers, to see their oppression.
Because you look at an Apsara and all you see is privilege.
Exactly, you see the beauty and the gold. But beneath that aesthetic veneer, there is an absolute void of self-determination. And this becomes glaringly obvious when a real crisis hits the court.
Yes, the Vishwamitra crisis.
Right, let's look at Indra's absolute panic over Vishwamitra, because that's when the mask completely slips.
Vishwamitra is the ultimate threat to Indra. He is a mortal king turned sage who is accumulating so much tapas that he is practically creating a parallel heaven.
He's literally building a rival universe.
Yes. So Indra summons Menaka. And notice the power dynamic here. He doesn't request her assistance. He summons and orders her.
Like a boss calling an employee into the office on a Friday at 4 p.m.
Exactly. But Menaka, who is highly intelligent, sees exactly what is happening. She realizes she's being asked to clean up the mess Indra made by letting Vishwamitra get so powerful in the first place.
And she's not having it.
No, she actively resists. She outright refuses at first, telling Indra she will not be his whore of heaven.
And Indra's reaction to that specific word, whore, is so telling. He hates that word. Why? Because it completely strips away the glamorous euphemisms he relies on.
He needs the euphemisms to feel righteous.
Right. He wants to call it divine duty. But when Menaka refuses, the benevolent CEO of Facade drops instantly. He explicitly threatens her.
He does. The gloves come off.
He tells her, "If you still decline, I shall be forced to send someone else," heavily implying that she will face severe consequences or that he will force another woman to do it, putting all that moral weight directly on Menaka.
It's manipulative.
It's so manipulative. He reminds her, "I am still your king, I order you." It is pure, unadulterated coercion. There's no choice involved at all.
Which brings up a fascinating philosophical conflict within the novel itself. Because if the system is this overtly coercive, why do some of the Apsaras actively defend it?
Oh, that's a great point. Not everyone is rebelling.
Right. Why do some of them seem to actually enjoy their roles? This introduces the theme of the illusion of erotic freedom and the dichotomy of choice.
Yes, the dynamic between Menaka and Urvashi is central here. Urvashi is another highly prominent Apsara, perhaps the most famous next to Menaka. But Urvashi has a completely different worldview, doesn't she?
She does. Urvashi is a fierce champion of the Apsara lifestyle.
She loves it.
She really does. She tells Menaka, "We Apsaras are supposed to be free and unconfined in our choice. We make love and leave. That is our motto."
She sees herself as the ultimate empowered single woman.
Exactly. Urvashi looks down at human women, or even the Devis who have husbands, and she sees them as subjugated by marriage, fidelity, and domestic family life. To Urvashi, because Apsaras have no marital ties and no domestic obligations, they're the ones who are truly liberated. She constantly reiterates to Menaka, "We are free and carefree."
You know, on the surface, if you were looking through a very narrow lens of sexual liberation, Urvashi's argument is super seductive.
It sounds like pure empowerment.
Yeah. But when Kane applies a deeper feminist critique to this, we see the tragic irony of Urvashi's position. Urvashi has so deeply internalized the patriarchal rules of Indralok that she has basically mistaken isolation for independence.
That's a perfect way to put it. Isolation disguised as independence.
Right. She believes she's free simply because she isn't tied to one man in a domestic setting. What she fails to realize is that she is universally tied to an entire system controlled by a man, Indra.
She's traded one husband for a corporate overlord.
Exactly. Menaka is the one who pierces this illusion. Menaka realizes that while she has been armed with the weapons of love, sex, and desire, she's been entirely disarmed of her capability of conscious choice and decision.
Let's connect that to Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, which is heavily referenced in our source material.
Oh yes, the Greer connection is fascinating.
Greer discusses how being transformed into an object of male fantasy actually results in the desexualization of women.
Now, can you explain the mechanics of how that applies to an immortal seductress? Because it seems completely contradictory that a literal goddess of seduction would be desexualized.
It does sound counterintuitive at first, but Greer's point is really about the alienation of desire.
Alienation of desire.
Yes. When a woman is conditioned to exist solely as the object of male fantasy, she becomes hyper-focused on performing the fantasy. She performs the simulacrum of desire.
So she's acting out what men think desire looks like.
Exactly. And over time, she becomes alienated from her own authentic subjectivity. She loses touch with what she actually wants as a human being because her wants are irrelevant to her social function.
Right, because her job isn't to feel. Her job is to make the guy feel.
Precisely. The Apsaras are trained to simulate desire and to provoke it in men, but their own genuine internal desires are functionally erased. Their sexuality is just a tool owned by the state.
So when Menaka actually falls in love with the Gandharva Vasu, it's not just a cute romantic subplot, it's a massive structural crisis.
Oh, it's a huge deal. Just for context, a Gandharva is a celestial musician and warrior, often paired with Apsaras in the mythology.
Right, they kind of run in the same circles.
Yeah. But when Menaka falls in love with Vasu, it completely short-circuits the corporate machinery of Indralok.
Because she's doing something unauthorized.
Right. Rati, the goddess of love, explicitly warns Menaka about this. She tells her that Apsaras are supposed to be heartless, designed for quick pleasures and lusts, not lasting, authentic love.
So having real feelings is a breach of contract.
Basically, yes. By falling in love, Menaka is acting on her own unmandated desire. In a system built on total control of female sexuality, authentic love is an act of treason.
Okay, I want to play devil's advocate for a second here because a listener might be looking at this and thinking, wait, Vishwamitra has the power to create galaxies with a single thought, right?
He's incredibly powerful, yes.
And Menaka walks into the forest, and with a glance and maybe a piece of silk, she brings this all-powerful being to his knees. How can we argue she is powerless when she wields a catastrophic level of influence over the most powerful men in the universe?
That is the exact trap of the patriarchal gaze.
Yeah.
We confuse the weapon with the person pulling the trigger.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The power doesn't belong to Menaka. The power belongs to the gaze, to the patriarchal system that aims her at the target. Her influence is entirely contingent, situational, and totally dependent on male vulnerability.
It's reactive, not proactive.
Exactly. Earlier, we mentioned Kama warning Menaka that men are frightened by female sexual power. Kama explains that male sexual aggression often arises from this exact vulnerability, a deep-seated need to degrade women to compensate for their own lack of emotional or sexual control.
So she is basically handed a loaded gun and told exactly who to shoot, when to shoot, and where to stand. That isn't having power. That's just being conscripted into someone else's war.
Precisely. Menaka's profound realization is that her so-called power is an imposition. It isn't an auction she can turn on or off for her own benefit.
So she can't use it to free herself.
Right. She calls it what it is. Sexual slavery dressed up as divine duty. When she is ordered to seduce Vishwamitra, she isn't exercising agency. She is performing a highly dangerous state-mandated task under the threat of punishment.
That completely flips the script on the whole temptress archetype. Her beauty is a weapon she didn't choose to carry.
It really does reframe everything.
But as we read further into Kane's text, the absolute undeniable proof that these women don't own their bodies isn't just about who they are forced to sleep with.
No, it goes much deeper than that.
It's about what happens when that state-mandated sexuality results in the creation of life. This part of the book is genuinely agonizing to read. Let's talk about the pregnancies and the reproductive vulnerability of the Apsaras.
This is really the emotional core of Menaka's rebellion, and it exposes the absolute cruelty of Indralok loss.
It's so harsh.
It is. Apsaras are immortal, they are sexually active, but they are strictly legally forbidden from raising children. Indra decrees it bluntly in the text. The dancing nymphs can't have babies.
Just a blanket ban on motherhood.
Yes, and the consequences of this law are devastating. Menaka goes through this trauma multiple times. First, she becomes pregnant with Vasu's child, a girl named Pramadvara, and later she has a child with Vishwamitra, the famous Shakuntala.
And the system demands an intergenerational cycle of abandonment. The Apsaras must give birth and then immediately hand the children over to earthly surrogates, usually celibate rishis or kings down on Earth.
Right, they're completely removed from their children's lives.
Vrashi, who we discussed earlier, is the big defender of this system. She casually mentions that she has had many children and abandoned them all. She rationalizes it by claiming it's just the way it is and the children are better off without her.
Which is such a coping mechanism.
Totally. But for Menaka, this forced separation just shatters her. She pleads with Indra. She asks him, if you made a woman, why then can I not be a mother too? And Indra's response is just ice cold.
He tells her that emotions play no part in her life, reiterating that she is and always will be merely a temptress.
He strips her of her humanity entirely.
He does. And this interaction exposes what we can call the crime of motherhood within this specific patriarchy. Why is Indra, the king of the gods, so deeply threatened by a dancing nymph having a baby?
Right, what's he afraid of?
Because motherhood creates a profound organic bond that supersedes loyalty to the state. It redirects a woman's devotion, her energy, and her identity away from male gratification and political utility.
If she's a mother, her primary concern is her child, not being an available commodity for Indra's court.
Exactly. Kane exposes how this corporate patriarchy deeply fears the maternal bond because it is a source of autonomous, ungovernable female power. If Menaka loves her child, she has something to lose, but she also has a reason to fight the system.
This connects brilliantly to the source material discussing post-colonial feminism, specifically the work of Ghassan Bulbeck.
Oh, this is a vital connection to make.
Yeah, because Bulbeck points out a major difference in how motherhood is viewed across different feminist waves. Like early white Western second wave feminism, think Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, often viewed motherhood as a restrictive prison.
Right, as the thing keeping women out of the workforce.
Exactly. It was seen as the thing that kept women trapped in the domestic sphere and locked out of public professional life. But Bulbeck notes that post-colonial feminism frequently views motherhood entirely differently, right?
Yes, very differently. In many indigenous and non-Western cultures, motherhood is not a barrier to social standing. It is a profound source of social power, respect, and communal accomplishment.
It elevates you in the community.
It does. Bolbeck discusses the concept of other mothers in African American and indigenous communities, where mothering, whether biological or communal, elevates a woman's status. It is a vital public role.
So, by violently stripping Menaka of her children, Indra isn't freeing her from a domestic burden so she can pursue a career like a Western feminist lens might accidentally suggest.
No, not at all.
He is deliberately stripping her of this profound indigenous power. He is ensuring she remains isolated, atomized, and socially powerless. He enforces a patriarchal view that motherhood is fundamentally incompatible with her public function as a courtesan.
And we see the agonizing real-world result of this policy when Menaka's mortal daughter, Pramadvara, is bitten by a snake and is on her deathbed.
This scene is heartbreaking.
Menaka hasn't been allowed to see her grow up, but she rushes to Earth to be by her dying daughter's side, and what she does next is incredible. She literally bargains with Yama, the god of death.
She negotiates with death itself.
Yes. Menaka trades a piece of her own immortality to save her daughter's life.
It is a phenomenal literary moment, and it completely subverts everything an Apsara is programmed to be. Remember what Rati, the goddess of love, explained early on. Apsaras cannot procreate from mere lust. They can only conceive from authentic love.
Which proves she wasn't just performing.
Exactly. The very fact that Menaka had a child in the first place proves she was capable of deep, unsanctioned love, but giving up a piece of her eternal life, voluntarily sacrificing her divine perfection for another being, it completely annihilates the myth that she is a heartless, selfish temptress.
She proves she is a fiercely loving mother, capable of sacrifices that the actual gods like Indra would never even consider making.
Indra would never give up a drop of his immortality.
Never. And this trauma, the maternal fracture, almost losing her daughter, and the subsequent loss of her husband Vasu, is the catalyst for everything that follows.
It pushes her over the edge.
It does. She stops being a passive victim of the system. She starts fighting back.
Let's look at how she subverts the double standard and takes on the celestial court, because the inciting incident for her open rebellion is infuriatingly unjust.
It is enraging. Vasu, Menaka's husband, is falsely accused by Ramba, who is the queen of the Apsaras, of drunkenly assaulting her.
Now, the text makes it very clear Vasu is completely innocent.
Yes, it's a fabricated charge. But Indra's deeply jealous of Vasu. He has wanted Menaka for himself for a long time, so Indra uses this false accusation of assault as a convenient excuse to permanently exile Vasu from heaven. He curses him.
Which is just a staggering display of patriarchal hypocrisy. Indra suddenly frames himself as the noble protector of women's honor, executing justice against Vasu.
While he exploits women daily.
Right. But, as Menaka points out, Indra is a massive hypocrite. Can you break down what happens when she confronts him in Sudharma Hall?
Menaka realizes that Indra has routinely covered up actual, verifiable sexual crimes committed by his friends and political allies.
The classic boys' club mentality.
Exactly. But now, he uses the rhetoric of justice to execute a personal vendetta against an innocent man just to isolate her. So Menaka walks into the glittering court of Indralok, completely dry-eyed, completely focused, and she dismantles his entire moral facade in front of everyone.
And then she does the unthinkable. She goes on strike.
A literal labor strike in heaven.
Yes. She looks at the king of the gods and says, I announce right now, right here, that I refuse to dance in this court till Vasu returns. You are not my king.
In a divine setting, that is a stunning assertion of labor rights.
It is. But the true genius of her rebellion lies in the semantic warfare she wages over the word whore.
Right, going back to that word.
We talked earlier about how Indra desperately needs euphemisms. He tells her in this scene, there are no whores in heaven. I have sanctioned seduction here, and it is beautiful. Don't sully it with ugly words.
He needs the PR spin.
He needs the illusion. He needs it to be called sanctioned seduction, so that he and the other gods can feel noble about consuming this forced labor.
But Menaka refuses to let him use that polite fiction anymore. She forces the word onto herself and onto the court.
She weaponizes it.
She does. She tells him, to use my sex appeal to exploit men is intrigue. Engaging in sexual intercourse with a covert motive is not just intrigue, it is whoring.
Yeah.
You make me do that. By claiming that word, she strips away the divine romanticized veneer.
It's a brilliant tactical move. I want to understand the mechanics of this from a theoretical standpoint, though. How does claiming a slur actually give her power in this dynamic?
Well, in feminist theory, reclaiming a stigmatized word is a very powerful tool of linguistic resistance. By owning the term whore, Menaka removes Indra's power to shame her with it.
She takes the sting out of it.
Exactly. Instead, she turns it into an indictment of the system that created the conditions for the word to exist in the first place. She is basically saying, if I am a whore, then you are my pimp.
Wow. Put plainly like that, it's undeniable.
It exposes the fundamental double standard. The men of the court can be consumers of this forced labor without any social stigma, while the women forced into the labor are expected to maintain the polite, quiet fiction of their own divinity.
She holds a mirror up to the hypocrisy. It reminds me of like a modern whistleblower walking into the board meeting of a massive, corrupt corporation, throwing the toxic company culture right in the CEO's face, and refusing to work another minute until justice is served.
She holds the entire heavenly economy hostage.
She knows she is their most effective weapon, and she lays down her arms. She demands justice not just as an Apsara, but as a wife, a role that the system explicitly denies her.
And this refusal to comply, this strike, really sets the stage for her ultimate legacy, because Indra is eventually backed into a corner.
Right, because of Vishwamitra.
Yes. Vishwamitra's tapas continues to grow, the threat to heaven becomes critical, and Indra is so desperate that he has to practically beg Menaka to intervene.
But this time, the power dynamic has entirely shifted. Menaka agrees to go down to Earth to face Vishwamitra, but she does it on her own terms. She realizes she can use this state-mandated mission as an exit strategy.
It's her ticket out.
Yeah, she uses it to escape Indralok forever. And what happens on Earth is fascinating because instead of just seducing and abandoning Vishwamitra as Indra instructed, she decides to actually build a life with him.
This is where Kané's rewriting of the myth truly crystallizes as a vital feminist reclamation project. We can refer back to the Cambridge Companion to Feminist Literary Theory here.
Okay, let's bring the theory back in.
The Companion discusses the methodology of reading against the grain of patriarchal discourse.
Let's pause there because that's a very academic phrase. What does reading against the grain actually mean in the context of analyzing an ancient myth?
Well, traditional epics are almost always written by men, for men, focusing on male protagonists. In the traditional classical telling of this myth, Menaka's seduction of Vishwamitra is framed entirely as a tragic failing on his part.
Right, poor Vishwamitra got tricked.
Exactly. He is the great sage who lost his focus because a deceitful temptress tricked him. The traditional text focuses solely on the man's lost spiritual progress. The woman is just a prop.
A sexy lamp.
Basically, yes. Reading against the grain means looking at the silences in the text. It means asking, what was the prop thinking? What were her motivations?
Filling in the blanks that the male authors left.
Yes. Kané takes the silent, objectified seductress of the original epic and gives her a complex inner life, a critical voice, and profound agency.
She doesn't just seduce him, she falls in true love with him. They live together for 10 years. She has a daughter with him, Shakuntala.
It's a real partnership.
It is. And while the tragic reality of her situation eventually forces her to leave because, Indra's continued manipulations and the curse on Vishwamitra make it impossible for them to stay together, once the truth of her mission is revealed, she ensures her daughter does not suffer her fate.
She protects Shakuntala at all costs.
She refuses to abandon her to the wild or hand her over to the court. She leaves Shakuntala with Rishi Vishwamitra, a respected sage, ensuring she will be educated and respected, not raised to be a celestial courtesan.
And crucially, Menaka accepts her choices. She refuses the narrative of the tragic victim.
She owns her story.
She does. Later in the novel, when she is reflecting on her life with her friend Tilotama, Menaka says, failed relationships do not mean failure. I didn't fail them and they didn't fail me. It's a loss, but not failure. I feel fulfilled, not failed.
That is a radical redefinition of a woman's life, especially in a classical context. Usually, if a woman doesn't stay with the man, her story is considered a tragedy.
Absolutely. But she measures her success not by the patriarchal standard of whether she managed to stay with a man forever, but by the authenticity of her love and the integrity of the choices she made within an impossible coercive system.
She survived.
She survives the corporate patriarchy of heaven with her soul intact.
She transforms from a pawn of the gods into a philosophical equal to the greatest sages. Rishi Vishwamitra, the sage who raises her daughter, validates her completely.
He recognizes her true worth.
He does. He tells her that she isn't just an Apsara, she is a Shakti. He uses that specific word.
That's a very powerful term.
It is. A Shakti is a primal force of strength, energy, and protection. He calls her this because of her selfless sacrifices for her children. He tells her, you are protective and passionate, a loving, giving woman, an intelligent woman, your knowledge coming more out of your own experiences than formal education.
It's the ultimate respect.
That validation from a respected male sage completely rewrites her legacy. It transitions her from whore to philosopher mother.
It proves that she was never defined by the patriarchal gaze that created her. Kané's novel doesn't just retell a story for entertainment. It restores profound dignity to a character who had been systematically denied it for millennia.
It gives her humanity back.
It does. It forces the reader to acknowledge the labor, the trauma, and the fierce intelligence required to survive within a system designed from the ground up to exploit you.
Okay, so let's pull all of this together. Kavita Kané's Menaka's Choice basically takes a sledgehammer to the traditional patriarchal gaze.
It shatters it.
It exposes the romanticized myth of the divine temptress as a highly structured mechanism for institutionalized exploitation. It reveals Indra's heaven not as a paradise, but as a corporate patriarchy built on the unacknowledged labor and the strict reproductive control of women.
That's the core takeaway.
But most importantly, it reclaims Menaka. It pulls her out of the margins of Vishwamitra's story and centers her as a fiercely autonomous, deeply loving, and incredibly politically savvy woman who literally fought the king of the gods to a standstill.
It truly is a masterclass in how feminist literature can re-examine our foundational myths. It asks us to rigorously consider who benefits from the stories we tell, and whose voices are deliberately silenced to maintain the illusion of paradise.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. Think about the stories we've been told since childhood. The myths, the fairy tales, the historical accounts.
The ones we just accept as truth.
Right. If a woman like Menaka, who sacrificed a piece of her own immortality for her child, who publicly struck against a corrupt regime, and who wrestled with the deepest philosophical questions of existence, if she can be remembered by history merely as a heartless seductress, how many other villainous or tempting women in our history and mythology are just waiting for a feminist reclamation to finally tell their side of the story?
It's a chilling thought, honestly.
It really is. It makes you wonder who is really writing the scripts, and more importantly, whose voices are still trapped in the margins waiting to be heard.